September 7th, 1996. Las Vegas glowed under neon lights when a black BMW stopped at a traffic light on the corner of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. Inside the car, one of the biggest names in world hip-hop hummed quietly, unaware that his life was about to end brutally. A white Cadillac pulled up alongside. The window rolled down slowly, and then the silence of the night was torn by a barrage of gunfire that would forever change the history of music. Tupac Amaru Shakur, just 25 years old, was being dragged into what would be his final battle. But how did we get here? How did a young poet, transformed into a revolutionary icon, end up bleeding on the streets of a city that promised glamour and fortune? And more importantly, who really pulled the trigger that fateful night? To understand the end, we first need to understand the days that preceded it. Tupac was at his peak. He had just released his double album All Eyes on Me, which had become a smashing success, selling millions of copies and solidifying his position as one of the most influential artists of the decade. He had recently been released from prison, where he served time for sexual assault charges, and seemed determined to rebuild his life and career. His public appearances were frequent, his shows sold out, and his magnetic presence continued to attract crowds wherever he went. In those final days, Tupac seemed divided between two worlds. On one side, there was the sensitive artist, the poet who grew up surrounded by Black Panther activists, who spoke about social injustice and inequality. On the other, there was the defiant rebel, involved in the famous rivalry between the East Coast and West Coast of American hip-hop, a dispute that had become dangerously personal and violent. He was tied to Death Row Records, a label run by Suge Knight, a controversial figure known for his intimidating methods and connections to street gangs. In the week before the shooting, Tupac was working on new projects, recording songs, participating in interviews, and planning his future. He talked about expanding his career into film, about making a difference in his community, about leaving a legacy that went beyond music. There was an urgency in his words, as if he knew time was running out. In interviews from that period, he mentioned death with disturbing frequency, as if trying to make peace with his own mortality. "I'm not afraid of dying," he once said. "Being afraid to live is what scares me." On that fateful day, Tupac went to the MGM Grand to watch the boxing match between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon. The fight ended quickly, a knockout in the first round, and after the event, while walking through the casino, Tupac and members of his group got into a physical fight with Orlando Anderson, a member of the Southside Crips gang from Southern California. Security cameras captured the incident, showing Tupac and others violently attacking Anderson before being separated by security. This confrontation would later be pointed to as a possible motive for what would happen hours later. But was it really that simple? Or were there darker forces at play? After the fight, Tupac went with Suge Knight and other Death Row Records members to a nightclub called Club 662, owned by Knight. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, an opportunity to relax after the excitement of the fight. But fate had other plans. As the convoy of cars drove down the Las Vegas Strip, stopped at that fatal traffic light, the white Cadillac appeared. 13 shots were fired. 4 hit Tupac, piercing his chest, pelvis, and right lung. Suge Knight was slightly wounded by shrapnel. The shooter disappeared into the night, and to this day, officially no one has been convicted of the crime. But to truly understand what happened that night, we need to go back to the beginning. Where was the man who would become Tupac Shakur born? Who was he before the fame, before the spotlight, before becoming a legend? Tupac Amaru Shakur was born in New York in June 1971, the son of Afeni Shakur, a Black Panther activist. His name was a tribute to Tupac Amaru II, an 18th-century Peruvian revolutionary who led an indigenous rebellion against Spanish rule. From the cradle, Tupac was destined to carry the weight of the struggle for justice. His mother was pregnant with him while she was in jail, accused of conspiracy to bomb public buildings as part of Black Panther activities. She was acquitted a month before Tupac was born, but the shadow of the criminal justice system and racial struggle already deeply marked his life. Tupac's childhood was marked by poverty and instability. His family moved constantly, from the East Coast to Baltimore, where Tupac attended the Baltimore School for the Arts. It was there that he discovered his passion for art, studying acting, poetry, jazz, and ballet. Yes, ballet. The young man who would later be known as one of the toughest rappers in history studied ballet and played roles in theatrical productions. There was a sensitivity in Tupac that many didn't see beyond the aggressive persona he would later create. He was intelligent, articulate, and deeply aware of the injustices surrounding him. In Baltimore, Tupac met Jada Pinkett, who would become a lifelong friend. The two shared a deep connection, united by their artistic passions and their experiences as young black people in an America that often saw them as threats before seeing them as human beings. But before he could complete his studies, his family moved again, this time to Marin City, California, a troubled area near San Francisco. It was there that Tupac's life took a darker turn. In Marin City, surrounded by gang violence, drug trafficking, and police brutality, Tupac began channeling his experiences into music. He joined the group Digital Underground as a dancer and roadie, eventually getting his first verse on a group song. His presence was undeniable, his voice unique, and it soon became clear that Tupac wasn't just another rapper. He had something to say, and the world needed to hear it. His first solo album, Tupacalypse Now, released in 1991, was a cry of protest against police brutality, systemic racism, and the desperate conditions of American ghettos. Songs like Brenda's Got a Baby told stories of young single mothers abandoned by society. Trapped denounced the mass incarceration of black men. The album was controversial, criticized by conservative politicians who accused it of promoting violence against police. But for many young black people growing up in neglected communities, Tupac was saying out loud what they felt in silence. Tupac wasn't interested in pleasing people. He was interested in truth, even when that truth was ugly and uncomfortable. And that made him simultaneously loved and hated, loved by those who saw themselves in his words, hated by those who preferred those words were never spoken. His second album, Strictly for My NIG Gaze, continued in this vein, but also showed artistic evolution. Tupac was refining his sound, balancing political messages with songs about love, loyalty, and survival. He also began acting in films, starring in Juice and Poetic Justice alongside Janet Jackson. His screen presence was as magnetic as in his music. He wasn't just making music or movies, he was creating art that reflected the complexity of the black experience in America. But with fame came problems. Tupac became involved in several controversies and lawsuits. In 1993, he was charged with shooting two off-duty police officers in Atlanta, although the charges were dropped after it was revealed that the officers were drunk and had drawn their weapons first. That same year, he was accused of sexually assaulting a woman in a New York hotel room, a case that would permanently tarnish his reputation and for which he would be sentenced to prison. During the trial in New York in 1994, Tupac was shot 5 times in the lobby of a recording studio in an apparent robbery. He miraculously survived, but the incident deepened his paranoia and distrust. Tupac believed the attack had been orchestrated by people within the music industry, including his former friend, the notorious B.I.G., and entrepreneur Sean Diddy Combs. This belief fueled the growing rivalry between the East Coast and West Coast, a dispute that began as artistic competition but quickly transformed into something far more dangerous. Imprisoned and sentenced to up to 4.5 years in prison, Tupac spent nearly a year behind bars. It was there that he recorded his third album, Me Against the World, which ironically debuted at #1 on the charts while he was incarcerated. The album was introspective, showing a vulnerable and reflective Tupac, confronting his own mortality and the demons that haunted him. Songs like Dear Mama paid tribute to his mother and the struggles she faced raising him. It was Tupac at his most human, most real. But Tupac wouldn't stay imprisoned for long. Suge Knight, CEO of Death Row Records, paid his $1,300,000 bail in exchange for Tupac signing with the label. It was a Faustian pact. Knight gave Tupac his freedom and an even larger platform for his music, but also pulled him deeper into a world of violence and gangster retaliation. Death Row was known for its connections to the Bloods gang, and the atmosphere at the label was one of constant intimidation and threats. Released from prison, Tupac threw himself headfirst into creating All Eyes on Me, hip-hop's first double album. It was ambitious, expansive, and defiant. Tupac was making music for parties, for the streets, for cars with loud sound systems, but he was also making music about betrayal, about his enemies, about what he saw as the hypocrisy of the music industry. He ferociously attacked the notorious B.I.G. and others from the East Coast in his lyrics, throwing gasoline on a fire that was already out of control. Hit 'Em Up, released months before his death, was perhaps the most brutal diss track in hip-hop history. Tupac didn't just attack Biggie musically, he made devastating personal allegations and explicit threats. The song was shocking in its cruelty, and many in the industry feared the situation would escalate to real violence, and they were right to fear. So we return to that night in Las Vegas. Tupac was shot shortly before 11:15 at night. He was rushed to the University Medical Center where he underwent multiple surgeries. His right lung had to be removed. He fought for his life for 6 long days, drifting in and out of consciousness while the world held its breath. Fans gathered outside the hospital, praying, crying, waiting for a miracle. But the miracle never came. On September 13th, 1996, at 4:03 in the afternoon, Tupac Amaru Shakur was pronounced dead. The official cause was respiratory failure and cardiorespiratory arrest associated with multiple gunshot wounds. He was only 25 years old. News of his death shocked the world. Fans across the globe mourned the loss of an icon who had spoken for them, who had given voice to their struggles. Vigils were held. Impromptu memorials appeared on corners and walls. Hip-hop had lost one of its brightest stars, but more than that, it had lost a conscience, a voice that challenged the status quo and demanded change. Reactions from other artists were profound. Some expressed sadness and shock. Others, like Snoop Dogg, spoke about the tragedy of losing such a young and talented friend. But there was also a disturbing silence from some corners of the industry, an implicit acknowledgement that rhetorical violence had become real violence and that everyone shared some responsibility for the climate that led to Tupac's death. So who killed Tupac Shakur? The official answer is nobody knows. The case remains officially unsolved to this day. Orlando Anderson, the man Tupac fought with at the MGM Grand, was considered a prime suspect, but he denied involvement and was never charged. He himself was killed in an unrelated shooting 2 years later. Over the years, countless conspiracy theories have emerged. Some believe it was a hit ordered by East Coast rivals. Others point to internal disputes within Death Row Records. There are even theories that Tupac faked his own death, although there's no credible evidence to support this. The Las Vegas police were criticized for their sloppy investigation. Witnesses weren't properly interviewed. Evidence wasn't properly preserved. There was a sense that authorities weren't really interested in solving the murder of another black rapper. And perhaps there was truth to that. How many young black people are killed every day without their deaths receiving the attention they deserve? Tupac may have been famous, but to some, he was just another statistic. What we know for certain is that Tupac's death was an avoidable tragedy. It was the result of a culture of violence that had infected hip-hop, transforming artistic competition into deadly confrontation. It was the result of inflated egos, petty disputes, and a refusal to back down. It was the result of a world that glorified toxic masculinity and gangster retaliation, where showing weakness or seeking peace was seen as cowardice. But even in death, Tupac continued to have an overwhelming influence. In the years that followed, several posthumous albums were released, some using recordings Tupac had made before he died, others compiling verses and unfinished demos. The quality varied, but all were devoured by fans hungry for more of his music, for more of his voice. It was as if Tupac couldn't be silenced, even by death. His legacy transcends music. Tupac became a symbol of resistance, of someone who refused to be silenced or domesticated. His songs about police brutality and racial injustice remain painfully relevant decades later. When the Black Lives Matter movement emerged, many turned to Tupac's words to find strength and inspiration. "They got money for wars, but can't feed the poor," he once rapped. Those words still ring true. In popular culture, Tupac became almost mythical. He was the subject of documentaries, films, books, and theatrical productions. Museums dedicated exhibitions to his life and work. Universities offer courses on his poetry and philosophy. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A statue of him was erected in his hometown. Tupac became more than an artist. He became a cultural icon, a figure whose impact goes far beyond the music he created. For his fans, Tupac represents something profound. He represents the struggle against oppression, the refusal to accept injustice, the determination to speak truth even when that truth is dangerous. He represents the complexity of the human experience, the capacity to be simultaneously warrior and poet, tough and sensitive, angry and loving. Tupac wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, hurt people, made decisions that contributed to his own destruction. But he was authentic, and in this authenticity, millions of people found someone who truly understood them. Think about it. How many artists can say they changed not just music, but cultural conversation? How many can say their words inspired movements, that their ideas challenged power structures? Tupac did all this before turning 26. Imagine what he could have accomplished if he had lived longer. Imagine the albums he would have made, the films he would have starred in, the causes he would have championed. The loss isn't just the songs we'll never hear, but the wisdom he never got to share, the artistic evolution we never got to witness. His impact on music is undeniable. He helped define the sound and attitude of West Coast rap. He showed that rappers could be vulnerable, that they could cry, that they could admit fear and pain. He expanded the boundaries of what hip-hop could be, incorporating elements of funk, soul, and even rock into his music. Artists from later generations, from Kendrick Lamar to J. Cole, from Eminem to Lil Wayne, all cite Tupac as a fundamental influence. His approach to music, his raw emotional delivery, his willingness to confront difficult topics, all of this established a standard that's still followed today. But perhaps Tupac's most important legacy is the reminder that words matter, that art matters, that using your voice to speak for those who have no voice is one of the most powerful things you can do. Tupac grew up poor, surrounded by violence and injustice, but he refused to be defined by his circumstances. He took his pain, his anger, his experiences, and transformed them into something beautiful, something powerful, something that touched millions of lives. Today, nearly 3 decades after his death, Tupac Shakur remains a fascinating and controversial figure. For some, he's a secular saint, a martyr who died defending his truth. For others, he's a symbol of the dangers of gangster culture and the glorification of violence. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. Tupac was human, with all the flaws and contradictions that implies. But he was also extraordinary, a generational talent who used his art to illuminate the darkest parts of American society. So when you hear a Tupac song, when you see his image on a wall, when you read his words, remember that you're not just experiencing entertainment. You're witnessing the legacy of someone who refused to stay silent, who fought with every verse and every rhyme, who lived with an intensity few of us can comprehend. Tupac Shakur may have died that night in Las Vegas, but his voice, his message, his spirit, all of that lives forever. And perhaps that's the final answer to the question of who killed Tupac. It doesn't matter who pulled the trigger. What matters is that they couldn't really kill him. Because as long as his songs are played, as long as his words are remembered, as long as his struggle continues to inspire, Tupac Shakur will be alive. He'll be alive in every young person who stands up against injustice, in every artist who refuses to compromise their vision, in every person who believes they can change the world with their words. Tupac left us too soon, stolen by senseless violence that he himself had warned against. But he left us with a priceless gift, proof that a life, no matter how short, can have an eternal impact, that you can come from nothing and become everything, that your voice matters, your stories matter, your existence matters. And in the end, perhaps that's the greatest legacy of all.